Well, happy Sunday, everybody. Joshua Severe Weather. Hope you all have had a great weekend so far. And we are saying goodbye to the storm that has left the East Coast. A little bit quieter weather coming up this upcoming week, but there's signs right now for an even more significant outbreak of winter weather with cold and southern snow and ice in the potential picture here as we get beyond next weekend. And we're looking at primarily the week of the 20th through about the 25th and 26th. And while it's too early to get very specific on who's going to see what, we definitely see the signal for things. And this video is going to discuss what could happen, what we're talking about as far as the framework for this cold, who needs to be watching more closely, how cold it could get, and more. Before we get to that, of course, we're going to talk about what's happening the rest of this weekend. And I do want to focus more on what's going on in Southern California as the fire danger remains very high. And my thoughts and prayers are with everybody who is being impacted by that. Just a very awful situation out there, unfortunately. And it looks like we're not finished with it just yet. So I appreciate y'all joining me here. I am a meteorologist in Raleigh. The sleet is mostly gone from my backyard. It's a beautiful day here. It's chilly, but we will take it at this point. And much of the country is chilly as well, especially where the fresh snow is on the ground. We're seeing teens across the middle eastern part of the country, teens and 20s across New England, and below zero temperatures invading from the north here, the north central states. Now, that's nothing unusual for this part of the country, but it is definitely cold. And there's a reason that I live in North Carolina and not North Dakota. And I think you can hopefully identify with that as well. Really, the only mild places we have right now are the Florida Keys and deep South Texas, where we're in the 50s and low 60s. And of course, the Southern California coastline. But even freezing temperatures in Phoenix and Tucson this morning, and very cold temperatures around the Grand Canyon. Now, I do want to wrap up what happened yesterday in New England. This was interesting because I showed you what the forecasts were yesterday, and we definitely overachieved on the North Shore of Boston and in southern parts of New Hampshire. We saw 2 to 4 inches of snow where only 1 to maybe 1.5 were expected. So even though it really hasn't been that bad a winter, in fact, we're kind of in a snow drought here in New England. We're starting to make up some of that ground. And when you go up to down East Maine, we also saw places like Seawall and Acadia get 3 to 4 inches. But really, the snow that we're tracking over the next couple days is coming out of the north central states. And we saw amounts around Duluth over 6 inches, in Wisconsin, a couple of inches of snow. So that snow is translating eastward this morning. You can see the purple that we have on the map from eastern North Dakota to upper Michigan and northern Wisconsin. That is a winter weather advisory. We do have still a winter storm warning for the Arrowhead of northeast Minnesota and Montana. We do also have winter storm warnings in effect. And outside of some freeze warnings in our sensitive southern areas here in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Arizona, and California, it's a pretty quiet day here for this Sunday, and we will take that for sure. But unfortunately, in Southern California, things remain dire here with very low humidity and gusty winds expected. You'll see the red flag warnings again just north and west of LA, so Ventura County basically, and then on the eastern side of LA into parts of Riverside County and surrounding areas in the Inland Empire. And the reason that we have to be most concerned is that there's still a lot of dry air coming in on the base of this trough. Sorry, I just bumped my mouse. But you can see the trough here moving south of California. Now, there's going to be pieces of energy that rotate down the west coast here, and these are going to pick up our wind speeds aloft. And as a result, when you have very dry air locked into the western U.S. and faster wind flow, we have the recipe for more fires, or at least to sustain what's going on right now. And I know that's not what folks here want to hear, unfortunately, but that is the situation that we're in. Now, across the rest of the country, you will see there is a return of some gradual moisture here over the Gulf states. The air mass has warmed up, so we will be looking at mainly just some chilly rain, and that's heading east towards Florida here in a few days. It's going to look a lot like it did here last winter for some of you, but nothing major at this point, just miserable if you want to call it that. Across the northern part of the country, we're shutting off what's coming in from the Pacific and Gulf, and we're keeping things very quiet in this area. We are going to see pieces of energy that rotate from the upper Midwest through the Great Lakes and Northeast, but we're going to be void of any major storms over the coming days. Now, I do want to talk about California here first, and we've had some strong winds here across the Santa Ana Mountains, 40 to 50 mile per hour gusts, and in eastern parts of LA County down in Orange County, we do have some stronger wind gusts. These are expected to let up as the day wears on, but we are not out of the woods tonight, as we will have another event where winds are going to start to pick up out of the northeast and out of the east. And as a result, you can see by daybreak tomorrow, winds may gust over 50 miles per hour here in parts of Ventura County and maybe Santa Barbara County. around Oxnard and just up from Malibu here, we're going to see some stronger winds. South and east of LA, we will also have wind gusts over 50 miles per hour. When you get up past the Grapevine, we could see gusts over 60 miles per hour. So not quite as strong as what we had for the middle of last week, but still significant and something we need to be aware of here. Now, tomorrow, these winds do gradually relax in the afternoon and then pick up again in the evening. So our windiest time frames will be late evening and overnight. So while folks are sleeping, that's when things could be really bad, unfortunately. And we see this fire danger continuing into Tuesday as well. You can see how the wind speeds continue to show up higher and higher on the NAM model here, with a high gust here at about 63 miles per hour. And part of our challenge is when these winds flow offshore like that, they bring drier air in. We get used to the dry air this time of the year for sure, but when you're on the West Coast, it's very rare to see it this dry for this long. And unfortunately, that is the case that we're dealing with, as dew points tonight dry out into the teens and then single digits tomorrow afternoon in LA. And I know when I go to LA in the summer, those dew points are typically in the 50s and low 60s. So definitely very dry air in place, not good for those with respiratory issues, unfortunately. And we are going to stay dry into Tuesday and probably beyond that as well. So as far as the smoke concern here, we definitely still need to be concerned about that. You can see the Palisades fire here looking very bad today. And the wind direction aloft actually pulls that smoke farther to the south and east. It's been blowing from east to west or northeast to southwest. Now it's blowing more northwest to southeast. And that pulls some of those respiratory issues into LA proper, into Long Beach, all those areas here, and even down in Orange County, and then eventually back out to sea here as we get to later tonight. So a very bad air quality day expected in LA, unfortunately, if this model is correct. But we will see some improvement by tomorrow. We do have still the potential for more fires to form, but overall things are going to be at least getting better for LA. Now on the East Coast, we're quieter for today, but you will see moisture returns this afternoon to southeast Texas and southern Louisiana. Nothing severe expected, just a cool rain. And that is going to eventually move eastward here into southern Louisiana, into Mississippi, Alabama, and western Florida tonight. And then Florida tomorrow will be turning wet, especially towards the evening hours in North Florida, and then across the rest of the peninsula tomorrow night into Tuesday. Now, again, we're not expecting severe weather. This is just kind of a cool and at times heavier rainfall, and it will help us in the longer term, but not pretty weather if you are planning vacations down here. In the northern United States, you can see a Clipper-type system over Lake Superior tonight. That is going to spread slowly eastward. Most of our snow is going to be on the Canadian side of the lakes, but we are going to see some in Michigan. We'll eventually see it moving into northern New England, western New York, and with the upslope moisture, we will see light to moderate snow falling in the ski areas from Tennessee up into Pennsylvania, with West Virginia favored for that. And you can kind of see on the map here, this big circle here over Minnesota. This is a piece of the polar vortex sending another wave of cold down. So this week in the northern part of the country is going to get colder again, but it is not going to be a widespread cold event. Here's a look at snow totals for us here. Generally a few inches around the lakes. Highest amounts are going to be on the Canadian side, where we could see up to 11 inches. Which is probably about 25 to 30 centimeters of snow up there. On the U.S. side, we will see locally a couple of feet over parts of upper Michigan on the western shore here. And in lower Michigan, a few inches of snow as well. But we get to the bigger cities like Madison, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, even Buffalo, we're not expecting much out of this. Just going to be a light to moderate snow for most of us. We are going to see some lake effect, though, so enhanced amounts of snow northeast of Syracuse up towards Fort Drum, as well as over the south towns and ski country here from near Erie into southwestern New York. And I will show you that here just a little bit more closely so you can see what I'm talking about. Let me pull up Pennsylvania so you can see that. You'll see locally, we could see a band that puts down maybe 6 to 10 inches of snow here over the next couple of days over parts of Chautauqua County and Cattaraugus County, as well as across the Tug Hill Plateau. So looking ahead, the rain is going to be the story for the next couple of days in Louisiana. You'll see we could see over an inch of that. We will also get some heavier rain to move up towards Mobile into the western panhandle, but then the amounts start to come down as we get into North Florida, southern Georgia, and central Florida. Generally speaking, less than half an inch. So it's not going to be awful, but it ain't going to be pretty either, if that makes sense. Our bigger rain is expected to move in towards next weekend, and that's going to be the next system we need to take a look at here in just a little bit, and I'll get to that in just a moment. As far as temperatures go here in the central United States, it's still chilly out there in Louisiana with the cloud cover in place. We may not get out of the low 40s today in places like Alexandria and Natchitoches. Upper 40s to low 50s around Houston. Dallas stays in the 30s and low 40s. A chilly night tonight, but temperatures are eventually going to start to rebound once that Gulf system moves out of here. In the north central states, you see the cold air rotates east and southeastward, but it doesn't really intensify much. And it is colder than average for sure, but it's not anything extreme at this point. Shifting to the eastern United States, this is where the cold is locked in, especially across New England here. And you can see it's typically chilly here tonight. As we roll into tomorrow, we actually start to warm things up. So more snow melts in places like Georgia and into the Carolinas and Tennessee. But we remain below freezing across Kentucky, West Virginia, and PA for tomorrow. As we get into Tuesday, you can see the cold air progresses, but it does meet some resistance when it gets down to the southern United States. But this is a chilly day for Tuesday. As you see, we're stuck in the teens and 20s in the Northeast, 30s in the Mid-Atlantic and Carolinas, and even Georgia and Tennessee. And even Florida is looking pretty nasty for Tuesday. Outside of South Florida, which will sneak into the 70s, we're mainly going to be in the 50s and low 60s in places like Orlando, Daytona, and Tampa Bay. So that's what we're looking at here. Looking ahead, you will notice that we do see some recovery in the Arctic Oscillation, meaning after this shot of cold, it does moderate some later this week, but then we see another wave of cold coming over the weekend and lasting into the beginning of next week. Now, the EPO, the Eastern Pacific Oscillation, when it's positive, that means marine air from the Pacific takes over, and that tends to lead to milder temperatures in the country. We see that a little bit, but then as we get towards the end of next week, it tanks here, and we drop down to as low as -4, or at least -3, and that means we're in for a period of much colder weather taking over much of the country, with the exception maybe of the West Coast. And that really gets itself strong here next weekend. So the cold is set to reload again as we get into next weekend. And the WPO, the Western Pacific Oscillation, does go negative. So when both of those are negative, it's typically a good sign that we're going to see a colder pattern in place. Looking at the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, when that's negative, we typically see cold locked into the east and stronger than average high pressure locked in over the North Atlantic and Greenland. And it's negative now, so definitely cold here, but it does go positive for a few days and then drops back to negative towards next weekend. And next weekend into the following week, because it is slightly negative, yes, storms are going to be progressive. They're going to move across the country, but the cold air is also going to be moving into the southern and eastern United States right on through about the 23rd or 24th. So things could get pretty interesting in that time frame. Here's the PNA, and it's positive now, meaning cold in the southeast for sure. And it does go negative, but then tries to go back to neutral. So for the southern United States, this isn't as strong a signal typically for cold and wintry weather, but it is definitely not significantly negative either until we get past the final weekend of January. So the opportunity is there for winter weather. If you take a look at the upper level pattern, the blues and pinks and purples, or at least the blues and purples and whites, indicate cold air aloft. The reds indicate warm air aloft, high pressure areas. Where those are in place, it's obviously warmer than average and typically quieter than average. Where this is in place, it's colder and wintry and more wintry. And you'll see on the eastern seaboard, we do get a little bit of a break from the winter weather towards the end of this week. This is Friday evening at 7 Eastern, but here comes the next shot of cold, and it's coming directly out of the North Pole here. So cross-polar flow into the western states here by the weekend, and that is going to continue to intensify as it builds south and east the week after next. Martin Luther King Day is the 20th. That's Monday. This is Monday evening, Inauguration Day, and you can see a much colder setup here over the central and eastern states through next week before things start to recover the following week. So we are eventually going to see a thaw, but it may take us till the very end of January and the beginning of February before that happens. So this is a pretty big flip coming. See how mild it is in Alaska now and how cold it is in the central and eastern states. When we get into February, you can see it's going to be colder in Western Canada and Alaska and the Northwest and warmer across the Southeast. This is going to look more like it did here back at the end of December when we had that severe weather in the Southeast. That's going to be around Valentine's Day. Here's a look at the shorter range here. This is the European. It shows a next wave of cold coming down through the Great Lakes. So the Northeast will be pretty cold. It also shows a trough that gets cut off to the south of California. And that is not great news for California, by the way, because when you have the ridge on top of the trough, typically what that means is we have a stronger offshore flow. And that is what we had last week. which created that fire danger. And this pattern kind of reloads itself here as well. We want to see the upper low moving northeastward into California to send that rain in, but it is pulling away, which is the absolute opposite of what we want to see right now if we want to get relief. See how it continues to escape the coast. Eventually, it is going to get pushed eastward here. There's a bigger trough moving into the North Pacific, and that kicks this eastward here. So you'll see our troughs finally move away. Things get more progressive towards Thursday and Friday of next week, but then we see the next wave of cold coming down. And if these two can phase together, then there will be a decent chance for a major storm next weekend. They're not quite phased yet, but you can see we're heading in that general direction. So that's what we're going to watch for you here. Here's the cold air in place to start next week in the east, in the Ohio Valley, where there's snow on the ground. It's pretty cold through the middle of the week. Then temperatures begin to recover at the end of the week. Looking ahead, though, I'm pulling up the zero-Z here. You can see that we just have some transient warmth for a couple of days. That means it's in and out for a couple of days. Yes, we get above average for a few days, but look at the next shot of cold that comes down here. I mentioned that. This is next Sunday, a week from today, and it gets very cold in the west, and then eventually the central states, and then eventually the south and east. And with all this cold coming down, this is going to set the framework for wintry precipitation, depending on where the storm track sets up. And that part is still going to be a bit uncertain, unfortunately. But when we see this area pink and purple getting all the way down to the Gulf, and then we see South Florida and the Caribbean above average, that gradient between the very cold air in the southeast and Ohio Valley and the very warm air in the Caribbean will typically lead to what we call is baroclinic forcing, which means storm systems can form. We've got that boundary set up where the warm and the cold contrast. And when that's in place over the Gulf, which is above average, then the pattern setup is looking pretty significant for something to try to form on the base of this cold and move through the southern U.S. and maybe even up the East Coast, maybe. And that would be towards not next week, but the following week and into the following weekend. So that is something snow and ice lovers may like to hear, but we have several days before we can narrow down what may happen. And you can see the temperature forecast here on the European, which may be an extreme case, but this is a worst case scenario for Inauguration Day in the 20s in DC, MLK Day as well, but 20 below zero in parts of Minnesota here. And look at this, where there's snow on the ground. It's got extreme cold coming down into the Ohio Valley, into the mountains, all the way down south here at the end of next week, and an even bigger push coming for the weekend after next. Now, is this going to nail it? Probably not. This is a 2-week forecast, but you can see here, this is a very significant amount of cold that is coming, and it's showing single digits for the eastern seaboard. It's showing the cold gets basically everywhere except far South Florida, where it will be chilly, but not cold enough to cause the iguanas to fall everywhere, it doesn't look like. So I know it's crazy, but I've been watching my Florida friends and seeing how that all happens. So we'll look at operational models real quick. Starting with the GFS, we see two features here moving east, but they aren't going to link up here early next week. Then quieter weather, and then we see the cold coming down here next weekend and moisture returning to the south central states. So we do have the possibility of seeing some wintry weather from Colorado and Kansas up into the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes. And we'll have to see how this system tracks. The GFS is showing disturbances forming on it, which could bring moisture back into that colder air mass and create interesting weather for us in the Appalachians and Northeast. But again, with just one model showing it, we can't get too locked into it. But then with that cold air mass in place and more moisture down in the Gulf of Mexico, things can get a lot more interesting. This is day after Inauguration Day, MLK Day, the 21st. We see snow and ice all the way down to the I-10 corridor and then moving up into the Carolinas. And again, it's just one model showing that, but then it shows potentially some more trouble in Texas towards the end of the week. So the cold is there. Is the moisture going to line up with it yet? Not exactly sure. Here's the European model, and it's going to look similar in the shorter range. Then as we get to the weekend, you'll see that it's a lot faster and stronger with the cold coming down. So the GFS had a storm system tracking up into the Ohio Valley and Northeast next weekend. The European says it's already colder and that system is offshore. That's quite a difference, but it does have moisture coming across the Gulf and a winter storm here all the way down to Houston and Austin, Baton Rouge, Montgomery. So the European is saying we are going to be in for a very interesting stretch of cold weather. With the last storm, the European was too cold. The GFS ended up being more correct. So just something to keep in mind there, but this would certainly be something that could certainly perk us up here in the southeast, and then potentially another system right behind it here at the end of the week after next. And the Canadian goes out just 10 days. It's kind of a middle of the road model here for these two. You can see it's pretty quiet in the east. Then we've got our system down south here next weekend. And then we've got the Arctic cold coming down. And the Canadian says rather than it's on the Gulf Coast, this is going to be more of an I-30 and I-40 type storm, eventually moving up to I-70. And that track is a lot more like what we saw this past weekend, or I guess Thursday and Friday, but it's actually even farther north and keeps it all rain in the Carolinas until it gets colder, of course, and then that could get things more interesting. So really tough to just say one model is correct right now. They do all have their positives and negatives to them, but you can see that the signal is looking a lot better, not this upcoming week, but the following week for some mischief down south. So if you have travel plans, you're certainly going to want to keep a closer eye on things in the days ahead. Here's what the GFS is showing as far as our ensemble snow. And again, don't get too carried away with it, but you can see starting to move farther south and east, especially around the 21st and 22nd. Chances starting to come up in parts of the mid-south and maybe even deep south, and then maybe another shot towards the 24th and 25th. So we still have a couple of opportunities here for snow, but we don't know exactly how all that is going to play out. Here's the European model, and let me go back to the ZRZ, which I had a second ago. And you'll see, yep, some snow in the Great Lakes and Northeast, snow in the Rockies here. Denver's going to get some snow, it looks like. Then as we get down to about the 20th, it comes all the way down into parts of the mid and deep south with that potential for the 20th and 21st. And this is something that we have to watch in the Northeast as well. And then after that, you can see there may be a second shot coming down here, but it's a lot less significant. But all the way down to Houston, it's showing some at least potential for something around the 24th and 25th before we warm things up. And this is what I actually trust a little bit more. It's that probability of seeing accumulating snow. And you'll see the places that are likely to see it, again, I had my ZRZ up a second ago, are nothing special here at this point. This is through the end of next week. And then here's next weekend. You can see things starting to descend farther south towards Martin Luther King Day and Inauguration Day on the 20th, that Monday the 20th. And you can see there's some possibilities. Now, they're not great, but coming down into North Texas, into Kentucky, into the Western Carolinas, and down into the Northeast as well. Notice how those chances are lower when we get into the I-95 corridor. But then they start to come up here the following week, and we have, I'm not going to call it a great chance, but we have a chance to see some kind of wintry weather all the way down into Texas, Louisiana here at some point that week. Again, this is a 10% chance. You can see Florida escapes that 10% chance, as you might expect, but it is a chance. And so, again, just monitoring that possibility for something to happen until we can see a clear signal at this point. So that's all I got for you all. I have to travel to Dallas for work over the next few days, so I'm going to have to take a break here. I don't think a lot's going to change in the next couple of days, but as always, I really appreciate everybody here. I hope you all have a safe weekend. If you are like me and you're a Christian and a believer, I truly believe in the power of prayer and in hearing the word of God. And I wanted to share a quick verse with you all. I think that will encourage you. Matthew 11:28 through 30. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavily burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I don't know about everybody else here, but I feel like everything's been so overwhelming because we're always just trying to do more. We're always trying to push ourselves. We have family to take care of, demanding jobs in many cases, businesses to run. We've got winter weather. We've got health challenges. It's really hard because we're all heavily burdened by these. But the great news that I wanted to share with you today is that if you do repent and come to Jesus and ask for him to provide that rest, he will give it to you. Today is a Sabbath. It's the seventh day, at least for what I believe. Some of you may believe it's Friday night or Saturday, and that's fine. I'm not going to disagree with you on that. But we are here to be given that rest so that we can recharge ourselves and be invigorated in the Lord, because he has sent Jesus to die on the cross for us, and Jesus has been resurrected. We are given that power, the same power given to him. We are given that power. And that is the good news that I wanted to share with you all here this morning. So I am off for a few days, but I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and God bless you. See you soon.